The night Kioma discovered she was pregnant, the entire family erupted in joy. After 5 long years of waiting, prayers and tears, God had finally blessed her with the miracle they had all been hoping for. It was her first pregnancy, and the happiness in their home was unmatched. Her husband Emeka couldn't stop smiling, and her heart was filled with hope and gratitude. Later that night, as Kioma lay in bed, she gently placed her hands on her tummy and whispered, "Thank you, God." Feeling a sense of peace, she slowly drifted to sleep. But her sleep was not peaceful for long. In her dream, she found herself standing in front of an old, dusty mirror in a dimly lit room. The reflection staring back at her was not her own. It was her late aunt Nneka. Nneka's face was calm but strangely determined, her eyes piercing through Kioma's soul. In her arms, she cradled a lifeless baby. Kioma screamed, tears streaming down her face, begging Nneka to stop. But Nneka simply smiled and whispered, "You cannot escape what is meant to be." Kioma woke up with a start, her body shaking and her heart racing. "It was just a dream," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. But as she looked around the room, she froze in terror. The mirror on her dresser was cracked, and the reflection staring back at her was not her own. It was Nneka's. Kioma screamed, clutching her stomach. "God, please don't let this be real. Please, no!" Her screams woke Emeka, who rushed to her side. The sight of the cracked mirror drained the color from his face. Without wasting a second, he scooped her up and rushed her to the hospital, but it was too late. The doctors delivered the devastating news: she had miscarried. Kioma's world shattered. She and Emeka cried together in the hospital room, their dreams crumbling after years of waiting and hoping. The next day, still grieving, Kioma packed a small bag and decided to visit her mother. She needed comfort, someone who would understand the depth of her pain. As she walked into her childhood home, she passed the old family photo album on the hallway table. For a moment she froze, unsure whether to open it or walk past. Was the dream just a nightmare, or did it have something to do with her aunt's mysterious death? Before Kioma could decide, her mother walked up to her with open arms and hugged her tightly. "My child, welcome home," her mother said warmly. Kioma stiffened in her embrace, her face cold and unwelcoming. "Thank you," she muttered quickly, stepping back. Her mother studied her with a worried expression. "Are you okay? You don't look happy. You look tired," she said, her voice filled with concern. "I'm fine," Kioma replied curtly, avoiding eye contact. "Let me go see Dad." She walked away, leaving her mother standing in the hallway confused. In her father's study, Kioma couldn't hold it in any longer. She fell to her knees beside him, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, what's wrong? You're scaring me," her father exclaimed, rushing to her side. Through her sobs, Kioma managed to say, "I lost the pregnancy, Dad. I lost it." Her father gasped, holding her tightly. "Oh, my child, I'm so sorry," he whispered. Kioma explained everything: the dream, the cracked mirror, and her suspicions about her late aunt Nneka. "Dad, I think Nneka has something to do with this," she said, her voice trembling, but her father quickly interrupted her. "No, my child, don't think like that. Sometimes the devil can use the faces of people we love in dreams to create confusion and mistrust. Nneka was a good woman. She loved you like her own. I don't believe she would hurt you."
"But Dad," Kioma began, but her father shook his head gently. "Listen to me, my child. Let's keep praying and trusting God. The one who will stay will come. This is not the end. Hold on to your faith," her father said, stroking her hair. Kioma nodded through her tears, but the doubt in her heart remained. As her father held her, she silently wondered if she could ever trust her family's past again. Later that evening, Kioma's mother knocked on the door. "Kioma, is everything okay?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. Kioma stepped out to meet her, closing the door gently behind her. She explained everything: the dream, the cracked mirror, and the devastating loss of the pregnancy. Her mother's face turned pale as tears welled up in her eyes. "God forbid me hurting my own," her mother exclaimed, her voice trembling with emotion. "I would never harm you or anyone in this family." Kioma's mother placed a hand on her shoulder. "I know, Kioma. I believe this is the devil trying to break the peace we've always had in this family." She nodded and then said thoughtfully, "There's a place I know, a prophetess. She's a powerful woman of God, and she knows how to deal with spiritual issues. We should go to her. She can help us." Kioma and her mother exchanged a glance. Though they were hesitant, they trusted each other. Together, they decided to visit the prophetess in hopes of finding answers and peace. The journey to the prophetess's place was long and eerie. They traveled to a small village, walking along a narrow narrow path that led to a hillside near a dark, winding river. The valley was surrounded by tall, shadowy hills, and the air felt heavy, almost as if it carried secrets no one dared to speak of. When they arrived, the prophetess was waiting for them. She was an older woman with a wise and weathered face, wearing a long, flowing robe. Her piercing eyes seemed to look straight into Kioma's soul, as if she already knew everything that had happened. She nodded silently and gestured for them to sit. Kioma clutched her mother's hand tightly, feeling uneasy as the prophetess closed her eyes and began to pray. Her voice was steady and commanding, filling the small room with a powerful presence. The candles flickered, casting strange, dancing shadows on the walls. Kioma felt a chill run down her spine, and her grip on her mother's hand tightened. She wanted to run, but something about the prophetess kept her rooted in place. After what felt like an eternity, the prophetess opened her eyes and spoke softly, her voice filled with mystery. "Kioma," she said, "you are being followed by a powerful spirit. This spirit comes from the mirror, and it has been connected to you since before you were born. It is causing these strange events in your life, and we must perform a special prayer to break its hold over you." Kioma's mother's face turned pale as she held Kioma's hand tighter. "Please, do whatever you must to help my daughter," she pleaded. The prophetess shook her head slowly. "This cannot be done without her husband's presence. You must return in the morning with him. Bring something from Kioma's childhood, preferably a piece of her baby clothing. Tonight, however, we must begin the first prayer. Only I and her mother can perform it. Kioma will stay here with us. Do not worry, she will be safe." Kioma's mother hesitated, her heart heavy with worry. She didn't want to leave her daughter behind, but she had no choice. She held Kioma's hand and whispered, "Be brave, my child. I'll be back in the morning with Emeka. Trust God and trust these women to help you." As her mother left, Kioma felt a knot of fear tighten in her stomach. She sat quietly as the prophetess began preparing for the night. She lit candles and sprinkled water around the room, murmuring prayers under her breath. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows on the walls, making the room feel mysterious and slightly spooky. Kioma's mother stayed by her side, holding her hand and whispering words of comfort. "Don't be afraid, my child. We are here to help you." But as the night deepened and the air grew colder, Kioma couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary and terrifying was about to happen. Late that night, when the world was silent and still, the prophetess called Kioma into the small prayer room. The room was dimly lit with candles, their flickering flames casting strange, dancing shadows on the walls. The air felt heavy, as if the room held secrets too big for words. The only sound was the prophetess's soft yet commanding voice. "Kioma, come here," the prophetess said, her eyes gleaming in the candlelight. She handed Kioma a long white cloth. "Tie this around your chest and over your head." Kioma held the cloth in her trembling hands, feeling its cool texture against her skin. Her heart raced as she tied it around herself, following the prophetess's instructions. She looked around the room, feeling nervous but also a small flicker of hope. "Maybe this is it," she thought. "Maybe this will end all my troubles." The prophetess began praying again, her voice rising and echoing off the walls. The words were strange and powerful, filling the room with an otherworldly energy. Kioma closed her eyes and tried to focus, but her fear grew with every passing second. Then, an hour later, the prophetess brought out a thick rope. She walked toward Kioma and began tying her hands together tightly. Kioma's heart pounded in her chest. "Why are you tying my hands?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Stay strong, child," the prophetess said, her tone calm but firm. "This is the only way to drive the spirits away." The prophetess pulled out 3 large sticks and raised them high. With a loud crack, the first strike landed on Kioma's back. Kioma gasped in pain, tears springing to her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" she cried out. "Be strong," the prophetess repeated. "This pain will set you free. It's the only way to break the hold of the spirit." The beating continued, each strike sharper and heavier. Kioma sobbed, her tears streaming down her face, but she didn't resist. She closed her eyes tightly, praying that this would be the end of her suffering. With every strike, she whispered silently, "God, please let this be the last time." When morning came, Emeka and Kioma's mother arrived at the prayer house. carrying everything they had been told to bring: baby clothes, salt, and an old family photograph. The moment Emeka saw Kioma, his heart broke. Her body was bruised, her face pale, and her eyes filled with pain. He ran to her, holding her tightly. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice trembling with anger and heartbreak. He looked down and saw the red, swollen marks on her back and arms. Tears filled his eyes as he held her close. Kioma took a deep breath, her voice barely a whisper. "It's over now," she said, trying to reassure him. The prophetess walked into the room, carrying a small mirror. She handed it to Kioma and said, "Keep this mirror in your home and never cover it. With this, no spirit can harm you again. There will be no more loss of pregnancy." Kioma and Emeka left the prayer house that afternoon, their hearts heavy but hopeful. As they traveled back to the city, they clung to the hope that their nightmare was finally over. But deep down, something didn't feel right. Late that night, Emeka sat up beside Kioma, pressing a warm towel against her bruised back. The room was quiet except for their breathing and the occasional hiss of the hot water. "Baby," Emeka said softly, breaking the silence, "do you really think this prophetess is real?" Kioma winced as the towel pressed against a sore spot. "Yes, Emeka, she is real. My mother took me to her before, and it was after that visit that I conceived for the first time. I didn't want to tell you before because I was desperate. I needed answers."
Emeka paused, his brow furrowed. "Something feels off about that place. I can't explain it, but it doesn't sit right with me." Kioma didn't reply immediately. She stared at the wall, her mind replaying the events of the night before. The beating, the prayers, the strange energy in the room. It all felt like a distant dream. But was it? As the clock ticked on, a shadow of doubt crept into her heart. Was the nightmare really over, or had it only just begun? 2 months after her last miscarriage, Kioma discovered she was pregnant again. The joy was indescribable. She rushed to tell Emeka, tears in her eyes. "I told you the prophetess is real," she exclaimed, her voice trembling with excitement. "Her prayers are working. Her church is growing so fast because of the good work she does in God's name." Emeka hugged her tightly, relieved but still cautious. "Let's keep praying," he said softly, though a part of him remained uneasy. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Kioma glowed with happiness, and every visit to the doctor confirmed that the baby was healthy. They began preparing for their long-awaited child. Everything felt perfect until the pregnancy clocked exactly 20 weeks. That night, Kioma drifted off to sleep. In her dream, she found herself in the same dreadful scene as before. She was standing in front of the old dusty mirror, her reflection replaced by her late aunt, Neka. Neka's face was calm but determined, her eyes piercing through Kioma's soul. In her arms, she cradled a lifeless baby. Kioma screamed, begging Neka to stop, but Neka simply smiled and whispered, "You cannot escape what is meant to be." Kioma woke up with a jolt, her heart pounding like a drum. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she noticed her bed sheet soaked with blood. "No!" she cried out, her voice breaking. "Not again!" Emeka rushed to her side, panic written all over his face. He scooped her up and rushed her to the hospital, but the worst had already happened. The doctors confirmed she had miscarried. From that day on, it became a heartbreaking cycle. Kioma would conceive, and exactly at 20 weeks, she would lose the pregnancy. They visited the best hospitals in the country, but every doctor said the same thing. There was nothing physically wrong with her. One night, Kioma couldn't hold it in any longer. She woke Emeka, tears streaming down her face. "Emeka, it's clear now," she said, her voice trembling. "God doesn't want us to have children. I've seen so many women visit the prophetess and carry their children. Even my friend Ada. Maybe I'm meant to live and die without a child. But you, my love, don't deserve this. I can't let you be part of my misfortune." Emeka shook his head, his voice firm. "No, Kioma, we will go through this together. God will bless us with our own children." Kioma looked at him with pleading eyes. "Emeka, I've already spoken to my mother. You should marry my cousin in Kichi. She will give us children. Please do this for me." Emeka jumped out of bed, his voice filled with disbelief. "God forbid. How can you even suggest such a thing?" "Please, Emeka," Kioma begged, holding his hand. "It's the only way. At least she's family, and we can be one happy family." But Emeka refused, his heart heavy with sadness and anger. Late one night, Emeka sat alone, his mind racing. "God, I know you will not forsake me," he whispered. "The time is now." The next morning, he packed a bag and told Kioma, "I have an urgent business meeting. I'll be back in 3 days." Though worried, Kioma nodded. "Safe trip, my love." Emeka drove for hours until he reached the old crumbling house where he had grown up, the place where his parents were buried. The house stood alone in a desolate field, surrounded by silence and memories. He stripped himself naked and knelt on the cold floor. "God, God, show me the root of our problems. He prayed, tears streaming down his face. He cried, fasted, and prayed for 3 days straight. On the final night, as he lay exhausted, he heard a clear voice. Remove the mirror and set it ablaze on the day the pregnancy clocks 20 weeks. Emeka sat up, startled. At first, he thought he had imagined it, but the instruction grew stronger in his spirit. Back home, Emeka convinced Kioma to try again. Reluctantly, she agreed, and soon she was pregnant once more. During the pregnancy, Kioma was placed on strict bed rest, but she continued to visit the prophetess secretly against Emeka's wishes. When the pregnancy reached 20 weeks, Kioma grew terrified. That night, she sat up in bed with Emeka, clutching her stomach. "Honey, let's stay awake tonight," she said. "I want to see the demon that comes to take my child." Emeka nodded, though he had his own plans. He gently mixed a sleeping pill into her drink. "Drink this, my love," he said. "It'll help you relax." Kioma hesitated but drank it anyway. Moments later, her eyelids grew heavy and she drifted off to sleep, unaware of what Emeka had planned. Late that night, while Kioma slept peacefully, Emeka quietly removed the mirror from their bedroom. His hands trembled as he held it, knowing this was no ordinary piece of glass. He walked into his small prayer room, clutching it tightly, and knelt on the floor. "Lord, I don't know what's happening, but I trust you," he whispered. He lit a small fire in a clay pot and threw the mirror into the flames. As the fire consumed it, Emeka's prayers grew louder, tears streaming down his face. "Whatever power has held us captive, let it end tonight," he cried, his voice echoing through the room. Emeka stayed awake all night, his eyes fixed on Kioma, who slept deeply, unaware of what was happening. Across town, the prophetess was jolted awake by a sharp pain in her chest. She gasped, clutching her heart, as the flames from Emeka's fire seemed to burn through her very soul. "No!" she screamed, her voice filled with desperation. "The mirror! It's gone!" By morning, the prophetess was dead. The news spread quickly, and Kioma's mother rushed to their home, her face pale with fear. "Kioma, Emeka, something terrible has happened," she said, her voice trembling. "The prophetess? She's dead." Kioma's heart raced as she realized the truth. The mirror had been the source of the curse all along. The prophetess had used it to manipulate and control her, feeding on her pain and desperation to grow her own power. Months later, Kioma gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. The joy in their home was immeasurable. As she cradled her daughter, Kioma looked at Emeka, her eyes filled with gratitude. "We made it," she whispered. Emeka smiled, his heart finally at peace. "Yes, we did, and nothing will ever take this happiness away from us again." The mirror was gone, the curse broken, and Kioma's faith restored. As she held her daughter close, she whispered a silent prayer of thanks, knowing that God had finally answered her cries. Life is often unpredictable, but seeking support from loved ones and holding on to faith can make all the difference. Each person's story is unique, and it is through sharing these experiences that we find connection and understanding. If you found inspiration in Nora's journey, we invite you to subscribe, like, and share this video. Join our community as we continue to explore stories of hope, healing, and resilience. Together, we can uplift one another and celebrate the strength that lies within us all. Your journey matters, and by sharing it, you may inspire someone else to find their own path to healing and joy.